Officially now on the record. Welcome everyone to this webinar / Q&A session. Thank you everyone for being here. We can already see people from all sorts of places, so it's really important that we have as much variety as we possibly can. It's always very enriching to see that. And today we have a very interesting opportunity as we have Mark Hancock with us. And just to formally introduce him, Mark Hancock is a teacher. He's a trainer and author based in the United Kingdom. He holds an MA in teaching English from Aston University. His books include Pronunciation Games from Cambridge University Press in 1995, English Pronunciation in Use, also from Cambridge University Press 2003, Authentic Listening Practice by Delta 2014 with Annie MacDonald, and PronPAG 1 to 4 by Hancock MacDonald ELT 2017, in Mark Hancock's 50 Tips of Teaching Pronunciation by Cambridge University Press 2020. He also runs the teacher resource websites pronpag.com and hancockmacdonald.com with Annie MacDonald. So, hello, Mark. Thank you for joining us.
Shall I start then, Victor?
Yes, please.
Right. So this is the presentation part before we come to the question and answers. I was just going to talk about designing pronunciation teaching materials and think aloud as I actually show some examples and think aloud through them. I'm going to actually focus on one particular issue, namely the ED endings of verbs, very popular in pronunciation teaching because it fits so well with the other aspects of the English teaching course that you're doing. You can slip it in when you're doing the past tense, other aspects of pronunciation, less easy to integrate. So everyone knows a bit about teaching the ED endings. I'd like to work through that. I think it's easy to reduce pronunciation into one thing and to forget its multiplicity. So I've got this acronym here, MMMM, muscle, mind, meaning, memory. There's a way helps me to remember the variedness of pronunciation. So muscle refers to what Adrian Underhill always calls proprioception, the awareness of your own muscle movement, the feeling of what it sounds like, what it feels like when you're speaking. But it's not only the muscles around the mouth, as Piers Messam of PronSIG fame often says. There's also the muscles of the chest, which create the pulses of air that make stress. That's also another aspect of this physical aspect of pronunciation, and that's the part which will be more relevant for our topic today, the ED endings. Then there's mind. This is the cerebral part of the aspects of pronunciation. It's a matter of thinking. Things like puzzles are good for this aspect of pronunciation. And here I've drawn a picture of a cauliflower just to illustrate the concept. Then there's meaning, which is the interactive aspect of pronunciation, the idea that the purpose of it is to communicate. So it's about getting an idea across, interacting with people, using pronunciation to make meaning. So information gaps is a particular activity type here. And then finally, last but not least, memory. And here I'm thinking of an acoustic memory, mental traces, as John Field calls it, the memory of the pronunciation, creating earworms, something that sticks in the mind long after the lesson's over and goes around and becomes part of your mental memory of the sound. So hear it, wraps. So these 4 aspects just help me to remember the various aspects to pronunciation issues. And with regard to this particular one, I'm thinking there's more than one issue involved with this. One thing is the physical, which is the extra syllable when the root verb ends with this in a certain way or not. And then there's the question of spelling as well, spelling-induced error, which is often underestimated, but students tend to want to pronounce that letter E, whether or not they should. They tend to want to do that. So that's more to do with mind. It's knowledge rather than an actual physical thing. So let me begin with some examples. And I want to start with something like focusing on the physical aspects of it. So I just chose some words, basically, example words containing the feature. And if this was part of a course, a lesson, I would choose the examples from the book, from the course book. You could use sentences from the course book, and you turn them into a drill, a pronunciation drill. But since we're not using a book, and we're not in the middle of a lesson here, and I've invented this one. Right? It's a little poem called The Door. It goes like this. Each line is repeated twice. Knocked and waited, closed and locked, closed and locked. Wanted it to open, waited, knocked, knocked. There you go. It's not rocket science, there's poetry, but it serves the purpose because we get some great examples of the target feature, whether or not it's an extra syllable. And so you really want for the students to notice the syllables here any way you can. Maybe you could do it with little claps. Knocked, waited, knocked, waited, knocked, knocked and waited. 4 syllables in that first line. Knocked and waited. I'm just looking for strategies to boost the students' awareness of the syllables, the fact that there's an extra syllable there. Waited, 2 syllables, knocked, 1 syllable. Whew, anything goes, right? Here's a little device that Judy Gilbert gave us all at the PronSIG at IATEFL one year. I've still got mine. Let me try this. I'm going to do knocked and waited through this kazoo. Just to see if it makes it any more noticeable, this stress business. Knocked, 2 syllables. Knocked, 1 syllable. So there's something else you could try. Anything goes. So I would use this as a drill, really. Maybe you could repeat each line after me. Let's do that. Victor, you're the only student in this class so you're going to have to repeat after me. Thank you very much.
Ready.
Yes. Knocked and waited.
Knocked and waited.
Closed and locked.
Closed and locked.
Wanted it to open.
Wanted it to open.
Waited, knocked.
Waited, knocked.
Oh, such a good student. Let's do it again. You can actually, by stealth, in the 3rd or 4th repetition, start to introduce music. How about this then? Knocked and waited.
Knocked and waited.
Closed and locked.
Closed and locked.
Wanted it to open.
Wanted it to open.
Waited, knocked.
Waited, knocked.
There you go. It just happens to fit to a famous French tune, Frère Jacques, so why not? So that's just working on getting the students to feel the difference between the single stress or the double stress. Now I want to move on to the mind games here. So here's one of these mazes that I fill my books with, right? I just want to show you how it works and how to make your own easily. So what you have to do is go from this corner to this corner. If the ed ending, if the past tense version of these has id, an extra syllable at the end, or to put it another way, do you pronounce the e in the ed ending? Started. Okay, well, that's a giveaway. You have to start there. So started is one. Let me mark that then. Started. Next. Stopped. No, not stop it. No, stop. Needed. Okay, Victor, what do you think?
Cannot be cooked because it's only one.
Right.
Right, but I have. Can I go? Well, I still have waited and tasted. Could I choose either of those?
Yeah, you can't go diagonal, so you have to go this way.
Always okay. All horizontally.
Horizontal or vertical? Yeah.
Okay.
Good point. Thank you. Next.
Oh, okay. Live. Lift. No. Yes, lift.
Lifted.
Lifted. And then. Okay. Hated.
Hated.
Okay, now I got it. All right. And wanted. Yes,
Yeah.
now I'm still waking up. I'm sorry. Okay, wanted.
Yeah, it's very early in Brazil.
All right, that's my lousy excuse. Shouted.
Shouted.
Right, texted.
Texted.
Added.
Added.
Ended.
Ended.
Hooray.
Yes. So there we have it. There's the whole route. Now, if anybody has ever attempted to make a joke, write a joke, you know you have to start with the punchline. And that's how you write a maze. You start with the punchline. You collect a bunch of words that have the id ending, and you write them in your grid, in a line. You write those words first. Yeah? And then you bury them in a bunch of distractors, words which don't have the id, like these. Simple. If you're going to make one of these, you need, basically, I would say a minimum of a 5x5 grid. 6x6 is a little bit better. In fact, you get used to making these, and you could even get your students to make them, which is fun. So what's happened here is that the students have had to go through what they tend to do is sub-vocalize. If you let them do this task on their own, they tend to sit there going, started, started, started. And they're saying it to themselves to try and instinctively work out if it has that ending. So they may do it totally silently, in which case they're kind of reading it in their head in silence. And that made me think, right? Because there's a lot of these games in my book, pronunciation games and PronPack, and I'm thinking, but if a student does it silently, is it pronunciation anymore? Is there such a thing as silent pronunciation? Does that make sense? And yes, I think it does, because this is the aspect I was talking about here, mind. There is a part of pronunciation which is awareness, which is knowledge. So this works on that. And if you're going to make one of these, top tip, it has to be an aspect of pronunciation which is not obvious from the spelling. So in this case, the spelling is pretty much, if all of these past tenses end with ed, the spelling conceals a difference. If you're going to work, for example, on the phoneme m, it's probably not going to work because the correspondence between the spelling and the pronunciation is pretty much regular, and you're not going to find any distractors. that the students are going to be tempted by. So yeah, this only works for things that are concealed by the spelling, because it has to be written. Obviously, you can't have a maze which is not written. So that's puzzle. Having achieved this, you would ask the students to see if they can notice any rule or pattern. And hopefully they're going to notice that all of these root words end with t or d. So the students can discover the rule by themselves, by looking. Incidentally, many students are going to find the ones which are not in this path more difficult, because they tend to add an extra syllable because of the spelling. So they might say knocked. So you could also drill the words which are not in the path when you come to go through the activity at the end. Right, so the next activity type, where are we on to next, is to do with the interactive aspect, meaning, information gaps. I'm going to actually share a screen for this one because I couldn't be bothered to draw it out on my whiteboard. There we go. This was a game from Pronunciation Games way back in 1995. So you have to go left or right according to the blue or red here. They ask a question. They asked a question. So if I say ask, you're going to go left. If I say asked, you're going to go right. So for example, number 1, they ask a question. I'm going to go this way. That was a left. Number 2, I looked at the pictures. That's a right turn there. Thanks for your help there, Victor. Where should we go next? Number 3, we walked up a hill.
We should go right.
Okay, I'll go right then. And finally, you dance all night.
Right again.
Ah, my pronunciation wasn't clear enough. Let me try again.
My lesson wasn't clear enough.
You dance all night.
To the left.
Oh, thank you. That's exactly where I wanted to go. A miracle of communication takes us to Cape Town. So you do this first teacher to class and then students to students in pair work. And the point is to get to the same place, or to guide your listener to the place you want to get to. And if they don't go to the same place, you've tried to work out what went wrong, and you try to pronounce more clearly or listen more sharply, whatever. Now, I've adapted this here. These are kind of minimal pairs. Strictly speaking, they're not minimal pairs, but effectively they're minimal pairs. So let's say they're minimal pairs. Ask a question, ask a question. Look at the pictures, looked at the pictures. First off, you might do it just the words by themselves, ask, asked. And then you might add the sentences later. If you're making your own, you might find it's sometimes quite difficult to find a context which works for both options. That's what takes a bit of time with these contextualized minimal pairs. But in this instance, it's quite easy because they're simply present or past. There's something else that you need to bear in mind if you're making one of these, if you're designing this yourself, minimal pairs for this, is the co-text, what comes before and after, and in particular, what comes after. You'll notice that in all of these examples here, I've followed the verb with a word beginning with a vowel sound. And that was to make the activity more viable, because if you follow it with a word beginning with a consonant, it sometimes becomes impossible. Let me show you what I mean. Oops. Here, these are either very difficult or impossible to distinguish. Look at number 4, where the next word begins with a T, you dance till dawn. It's potentially identical, past or present. You're just going to have to know by context in a case like this. And so it's a really poor example for your activity. Your activity will be unfair to students, trying to make them distinguish things which people normally wouldn't distinguish. You'd be asking of them more than expert speakers of the language do already. So that's just something to bear in mind when you're creating minimal pairs, and in this instance, past or present pairs. And the last activity was the idea of memory or earworms, raps. So I made this one. Yeah, I just didn't take me too long, and it's got plenty of examples. It creates a little narrative that may stick in the student's mind, and putting it in context also gives you opportunity to show linking and stuff. So like this: Cinderella cooked and cleaned. She worked and never stopped. She served her ugly sisters who played around and shopped. Cinderella dressed in rags. She washed and cleaned the floor. But then one day someone knocked and Luck walked in the door. You could use this for drilling, for example. You could do back chaining. Let's look at the first line. Victor, repeat after me. Cleaned.
Cleaned.
Uncleaned.
And cleaned.
Tongue cleaned.
Tongue cleaned.
Cooked and cleaned.
Cooked and cleaned.
Cinderella cooked and cleaned.
Cinderella cooked and cleaned.
That's back chaining. And notice that I said tongue cleaned, putting the end of cooked. And that sometimes surprises the students, because in their mind, they're thinking cooked. And then when you have tongue cleaned, they're going, ooh, that's strange, isn't it? You're trying to make it strange. You're trying to make them notice something. Here's another point I would like to make here, is that cooked has a consonant cluster at the end, which some students will find difficult. But when you link it to a following word beginning with a vowel, that may make it easier. So it could be a facilitator. Cooked, tongue cleaned. It could actually help in give them a foothold into this problematic consonant cluster by splitting the cluster across 2 different words. So you could do a variety of drill types with this. You could just have a repeated segment. Cooked and 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 cooked. Just repeat it over and over and over again. Get the students to join in. And it starts to sound weird. And that's good, because it forces them to pay attention to the sound rather than what they're expecting to hear. So by the time you've drilled this in various different ways, at the end of the class, it's probably going to stick in your student's head like an earworm. And as they're going home, it's going round and round. Or after they leave your Zoom lesson and they go to the kitchen to make a cup of coffee, it's going round and round in their head. So it creates a memory trace. And those are the 4 approaches to the ED ending that I wanted to show as a kind of lead into this question and answer session, which is just about to begin, I reckon. What do you think?
Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
Got plenty of questions here to get us quite busy today. It's going to be really interesting to see. I will not follow the order that I have here, just to try to keep things as you presented them. There's a question by Nicoletta Sadu. She asked about. She wanted to ask how you make the difference in pronunciation between the two variants when ed doesn't make a separate syllable, meaning using that chart you have.
So it's a very good question, because the course books tend to want to get them divided into three: id, t, or d, and it's nice to have something to teach, isn't it? But I do think that you don't necessarily have to deal with all of those straight up. First off, you could leave the t or d for a later level, a later time, because of the three, I think the main difference is the one between the extra syllable or not. So that's the thing I would focus on first. The t and the d is perhaps less problematic. You could just leave it to what comes naturally. But eventually it is worth looking at, especially considering you end up with potential minimal pairs like, I don't know, played and plate, played being a past tense and plate being a thing you eat off. So yeah, and so it comes into its own a little bit there. And also when the next word begins with a vowel and you get a linking, then it comes into high relief, whether it's a t or a d. So I would present that at a later stage too. You need to go into the business of voicing. Is the final consonant of the root word voiced or not? And that leads into the rule that if it's not voiced, then it's going to be a t. And if it's voiced, it's going to be a d.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Now, here's a question by Carolyn Terry. She said that she loved the charts you've used, and she's used them in the classroom a number of times. And she was just wondering what your answer for the why is, because she usually says, and she picked this from an IATEFL seminar years ago, that if you can make a T or a D ending, then do. If you cannot, then add an extra syllable. Well, she says that that doesn't always work, though, because Brazilians particularly seem to be able to do it, even when you can't. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I can imagine how it's done. But on the parallel case of S endings, which are plurals, possessive, etc., I have noticed that with a possessive such as Alice's, students will persist quite a long way into their level, trying to say Alice, trying to make a double S there. And it is really awkward for them because they just don't know that they need to insert a vowel sound, and just makes it easier to say and easier to understand. But yeah, if your students are somehow able to make something that they're convinced is possible, as you say, Carrie, like, let me think, wanted. Is that the kind of thing you're saying? Wanted.
I was trying to think of examples as well.
Yeah, you just have to say, well, in this language, we don't like to have.
Uh-huh. Yeah, Carolyn has an example, because I cannot think of any now, but yeah. If you can make a T or a D ending, then you do. But if you can't, then add an extra syllable.
Yeah.
I really cannot think of one now, but yeah, this will be.
I reckon we could do it if we try hard enough, Victor.
Yeah.
Let's just say wanted.
Yeah, wanted.
Needed. you could just about do that. It's almost
Yeah.
it was a bit of a waste of time, but
and almost intuitively, because we are not going to focus so much on how we are articulating the sounds, it's going to sound like a schwa, and that's basically what would be pronounced regularly, right? Needed and wanted.
Oh, you're talking about the vowel, but I think Kerry was saying, what if your students were capable of doing it without inserting a vowel? What would you say to them then? I'm afraid I don't really have a snappy answer for that, except, well, just say, don't do that.
Yes. Right. Let's go to another one here. This one is, it was more about the muscle positions by Sylvie Dolakova. She'd like to know whether the muscle positions really work with students. Definitely not with young learners, according to her. Maybe we could try to learn their way, or imitation, games, and conscious action. So,
well, it's this. I called it feel it, right? Feel it. It doesn't have to be necessarily overt knowledge. This business, you don't have to say, oh, I put the tip of my tongue on the alveolar ridge, etc., blah, blah, blah. For your young learners, it's still important for them to feel it, but they don't necessarily need to be able to say it, to explain it openly like that. So a lot of this stuff is implicit with learners who are not really able to talk about it in an intellectual way. You can just do it more intuitively. It doesn't mean to say you're not going to do it though. Absolutely. And well, young learners are always doing nursery rhymes and chants and the stuff, and they're going to feel it when they do those. That's the joy of raps and chants and stuff. You feel it. So it's very physical.
Absolutely. Here's another one. This came from Adam Scott. What changes in pronunciation teaching have surprised you? Have surprised you during your career, and what do you predict might become significant in the future? On the philosophical area now.
So I am thinking that as English as lingua franca advances, this is the future, the second part of the question, and becomes totally normal and accepted as it must, then there are certain high profile pronunciation issues which may cease to be, because I'm thinking, the ship and sheep distinction, which is everybody's favorite pronunciation issue, so big that it even made it to the title of a book. And we insist that learners must distinguish between these two. But I think it's almost all learners from language backgrounds all around the world have this issue, this problem. And given that fact, I just wonder if sometime in the not too distant future, it might simply be that those two sounds merge, and we'll just have to rely on context to disambiguate ship and sheep. So there are certain central bits of pronunciation teaching which might little by little disappear. But that's the future. It might not happen. As for the past, what surprised me? I can't think right now. Sorry.
No problem. If you do remember anything interesting, just let me know. Now, this comes from Beata Valeshak. She would like to know about choral repetition in an online classroom for larger groups, 20 students and more. She's asking whether we should use it. And from experience, she says that she can tell that it's really difficult to offer individual targeted feedback on Zoom, for instance, as she cannot pinpoint the exact person to help them out.
Yeah, I think there was a webinar from our colleagues across in TESOL, which I've forgotten the title of it now, about this topic. But basically, they were saying if you have a large group and you're going to do this drilling, it's just going to have to be microphones off, and you just see, you can see a lot from camera whether it's working or not. And having done that for the whole group, you might then go with different volunteers from the class for individual. You might get a person like you, Victor. You might get a guinea pig to go live in front of the class. But it's true that it's not the same as in the classroom, right? You're going to have to go microphones off probably. And that's not entirely a bad thing. If you're doing choral drilling in a class, you very often can't hear the individuals very clearly anyway. So it's not so different. I mean, choral drilling is largely for the private practice of the individual learners anyway. They're doing it under the cover of the noise created by their classmates, and that's fine. So
the question about large groups reminds me of a context that I see in Brazil, that we have lots of, especially for secondary students and primary students in regular schools, they are in large groups. And so because of that, oral practice is almost neglected. So I would say that this is not just a problem for pronunciation, but it's a problem in how we approach teaching English. Because, I mean, it's almost unrealistic, right, to try and teach pronunciation to such a large group in that way and expect the kind of feedback we would expect in our reduced groups when we teach like in EFL centers or things like that. Maybe it's more of a methodological issue that it's really unfortunate that we have to deal with that.
You've got to maybe trust the learner a bit more and let them be in charge of their own learning somewhat, as already happens with people who learn from online stuff. They're in charge of what they're doing. I'm learning Greek currently using some CDs from the Michael Thomas method, and there's nobody listening to me telling me whether I'm doing it right or wrong. I've just got to work it out for myself. It doesn't make it ineffective. On the other hand, I think it's effective. I think you've got to trust your learners to be able to monitor themselves quite a lot. And of course, with a smaller group, you can get into closer one-to-one feedback. But if that's not possible, it's not possible.
This next, thank you for that, Mark. This next question, I think, is really central to today's topic of your presentation. This is by Jem Raja. She's asking, what is your creative process when designing material? How do you begin? What are the stages? What technology do you usually use? It's basically, what's your secret?
Yeah, well, so I showed you the muscle, mind, meaning, memory thing. That's one place to start, making sure that you're matching the pronunciation point with the problem. Identifying the problem is the thing. Is it a spelling problem or is it an articulation problem? Oftentimes, the student has a spelling problem. They're being misled by the spelling, and then the teacher struggles to going, oh no, you've got to move your mouth like this and that and that. And the student has no problem with the movement of the mouth. What they have a problem with is the spelling. So make sure that you diagnose the issue properly. So if you're going to design some material, start by working out what the problem is. And if it's for a student you've not had yourself, for example, if you're writing a book, then you've got to imagine what kind of problem are they likely to have, which may involve working out what their first language background is and doing some comparative work. One of the first things, let's say you've done that, step one. Step two, you probably need to get brainstorm a lot of examples of the target feature. And And for this, you could use, for example, a searchable dictionary, such as the Cube dictionary, which I'll just put a link up for right now, if I can find it. Yeah. So there's the Cube dictionary there. There's also the, I put there a rhyming dictionary, because if you're going to do rhymes, which I do quite a lot of rhymes, so it's useful to have a rhyming dictionary. So but basically it's a brainstorming thing. Those things will help your brainstorm. You get a load of examples down in front of you, and then you see what emerges out of the mist, what ideas come to you when you look at them. Whether it's going to turn into some sort of chant, or it's going to turn into some type of minimal pairs game, whatever. So from the examples comes the idea. I think that's about that, isn't it? Is it?
That's a really good start for us. I've got some more questions regarding this idea of what to consider in our contexts, and there's this one by someone you might know. Wait, what was the question? Someone's made it disappear. Maybe they changed the lines. It was by Taylor, but I can't see your question anymore, Taylor. What happened? So I'm going to move on to Hen Dayari's question. This is more on the motivational aspect. So he would like to know how we can motivate learners to focus and pay attention to pronunciation when in national exams they're not tested on pronunciation or on listening.
Well, pronunciation is hugely motivating in itself. I mean, just think, it takes you face off the page into a whole body experience. It's the one area of English teaching, language teaching, which is something you can feel as a physical thing. Therefore, it's a change of focus in itself. So it's motivating intrinsically, as long as you don't kill off that motivation by making it too run of the mill. It's easy to kill the motivation, but intrinsically it's motivating, at least because it's variety, it's different. It's different from your grammar and your vocabulary. It's a different focus. It gives you a breather, a break, a change. So that in itself is good. Catherine Walter, I think it was in the PronSIG magazine some time back, mentioned that there are some surprising overlaps between pronunciation and other aspects of language, and she focused on reading. She pointed out that pronunciation affects your ability, your reading ability, and I can see that how that would certainly be the case for me, because I tend to read aloud in my head, if you like. My reading fluency is dictated by my awareness of the pronunciation. So your reading fluency is going to be hampered if you're the way that you hear the sentences in your head is all broken up and doesn't match the structure. So pronunciation does overlap with other aspects and indirectly helps them as well. So it's I know that students might not find that a very convincing argument about why they should study it if it's not in the exam, but they should.
And I think we haven't realized how much we should actually pay attention to those things. It's still so much, maybe it's just because of all the amount of information we are exposed to, but it's really important to have more of this global and broader view into teaching aspects. Now, going back into materials and whatnot, this is the question by Taylor Vega. Concerning publishers. Why do you think publishers are still reluctant to use anything other than the so-called standard American/British pronunciation in their materials?
Well, there's the idea that the customer is always right, and the customers tend to be the owners of schools, for example, the government bodies who make decisions on which course book to choose. And these tend to be rather conservative views. Perhaps, I don't know, it's just an idea. In some languages, they have an official correct arbiter, which is the academy. And if you come from one of those languages which has an academy, you're likely to have a strong mindset that there is one gold standard correct way of doing it. And naturally, you want your English books to follow that gold standard and not some second-rate dialect. That's the kind of idea. So what you have is the stakeholders higher up the chain, I think, having a large part in dictating what happens. And not only higher up the chain, it's all sometimes customers themselves believe that they want the proper Queen's English, for example, whatever. Maybe they've seen an advert on a language school which says, we have native teachers. And they go, oh, they have native teachers. That must be good, right? They don't know it's good, but they think it must be good because it's being advertised. So that becomes a whole circular thing. You advertise something, people think, therefore they want it. Oh, it's in the advert, it must be good. And so it becomes a circular thing where people want what they think they want to get. How do you break out of that? Well, by stealth, I think. You've got to maybe break away from this standard, the idea of standard, little by little, through example, in the way you speak about language varieties and different accents. Simply never speak as if there is one. If your student says, yes, but what's the correct way of saying that? You say, well, I say it this way. Some people say it that way. But either way is fine, whichever suits you best. You just got to be totally ambivalent and never go along with the idea that there is one better or correct way. As for publishers, I think they can smell the wind of change. Yeah, I think there is awareness amongst them that they need to be taking this on board. Yeah.
Yeah, and we see this as, especially when you mentioned, well, when students ask us what's the correct way, I think as the more we have been including matters, and thankfully so, including matters of English as an international language, as a lingua franca, this idea of who is going to be held responsible for pronunciation is not the model native speaker any longer, is the whole community. So we have to try and strike a balance here. So we have to maybe make our effort to sound understandable by whoever our listeners will be, but our listeners should also be prepared to listen to us. So I think what I like about this new trend is how things are more even. We don't have just the model, because the model list native speaker is almost unattainable or unachievable. Where does he live? Well, who do we really speak to, right? So it's really important that we have this give and take right now. And just, there are more popular questions, but there's another one regarding the same topic we're discussing here, Mark. This is by Nihan Zaren. Guys, I'm anglicizing everything because I think it's important to give you credits for your questions, but please forgive me. So he's asking about the significant differences between non-native speakers and native speakers about teaching pronunciations. What do you think of this? Yeah, that's what he meant here.
Well, I don't know. It depends. It's slightly simplistic, I think, to say that there's going to be all native speakers do it this way, all non-native speakers do it that way. Within what you might call native speakers, there are people with lots of different accents already. So that's one thing. Within the group that you might class as non-native speakers, there are people who've perfected a very close or a standard accent, one of the standard accents, and they may have a very traditional view about what's correct and what isn't correct. Others, I don't know. I don't think there's I can't identify a huge, great big binary division between these two sets. But one thing I will say is that if you're teaching students who have the same language as your first language, which I suppose is the majority of teachers in the world, in fact, then you do have a huge advantage because you know where the students are coming from. So that's a great advantage over, for example, one of these super native teachers that you see advertised on the language schools. They don't know where you're coming from. And so they're likely to emphasize the wrong things, the things that don't need emphasizing, whilst missing altogether the things that do need. I mean, teaching when you don't know the native language of your students is like, I've compared it to wading across a river, but the water is cloudy and you can't see the bottom. So maybe it's covered in round pebbles and you're trying to wade across and then there's a great big hole and you fall in it. Wading across a river when you can't see the bottom. We all need to do as much as we can to find out about our students' first language. And the teachers who already speak it themselves are a huge advantage in that respect.
I hope we get to be able to discuss a little bit about teaching per se, because there's some questions about that, but there is one which is apparently one of the most popular ones in the Q&A here, which is about the muscles again. So people want some anatomy. We all talk about the muscles of the mouth to produce sounds, and no one talks about the muscles of the ear to receive sounds. Why do you think that is?
Well, yeah, I suppose muscles of the ear has to be in inverted commas. I'm trying to move the muscles of my ear now. Let's see if it works. Could you see that? No, you weren't looking, were you? All right, I tried to move my ears.
Yeah, move everything.
Now, about listening, it's interesting that the book by Native, Ann Cutler's book, Native Listening, I think is the title. She actually has some research on the difference between the way non-natives and natives listen to a language. And one of the things that she mentioned that I found intriguing was that with pairs like write and ride, where the one that finishes with the voiced consonant, the vowel sound is longer, and the one before the unvoiced consonant, it's clipped. And a lot of people say that native listeners pay attention to the length of the vowel as the first cue to differentiate between these two, whereas non-native listeners pay attention to the voicing of the final consonant to distinguish between those two. So there are interesting differences there between the muscles of the ears, and you could point such things out to your students to say, look, write, ride, point out the difference in vowel length, as well as the difference in voicing, and say, well, there are two ways of doing this. Choose the one that suits you best. So raise students' awareness of the things like this. Another thing that I get quite a lot here in Chester with students who are actually here, or were before the pandemic, of course, was the things like that they weren't expecting, like the glottal stop, which is such a common thing in students tend to blame their own ears, I believe, whereas you can say, well, look, it is an official sound. That's the symbol for it, the question mark without the dot. There's a symbol for that. And this is what it sounds like. And they go, oh, right, yeah. I just thought it was just my ears deceiving me or something. So I think you can look explicitly at features for listening. Students don't necessarily need to produce that glottal stop in their own spoken English, but they do need to not be fazed by it when they hear it. So in that sense, a lot of pronunciation is for listening.
Absolutely. And yes, and it's important that we consider the listening moment and components of that. And just like you said, we think of techniques for different types of language, so that's also going to impact how listening is affected. So different languages will have different choices as well. So
let me mention another idea from Ann Cutler in her native listening book. Was she used the term stress deaf, which is learners who come from a language where stress is not used as a significant feature tend just not to hear it. So you can say to your students all you like, you put your stress on the first syllable, and they go, what? Right. And you go, well, can't you hear it? Can't you hear it? No, I can't hear it. Sounds the same to me. So you have to watch out for the influence of the student's first language on what they're able to perceive as listeners. Are they stress deaf? If so, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, we haven't got much time left. Please, people who are helping me here, just let me know if I'm right with my timing. But I would really like to move towards the conclusion here with a question that might, I really hope this will help other teachers, which is on, who asked this question? Let me find it here. Okay, by Sylvie Dolakova. She asked, why teachers are sometimes scared of taking part of courses on pronunciation, for instance, and others feel confident with their own pronunciation and don't want to work on it. So more of the teacher development side. And if you can, please also consider the idea of, because some teachers here asked about drilling. And so I would like you to tell us what your take on drilling as a technique for teaching pronunciation is.
Okay, there's two very different sorts of questions there. So the first one was about teacher confidence, and teachers may have been influenced by bad experiences, like not being able to acquire sounds very easily, and they may have been told, well, look, your English is good, but your accent is terrible, or they may have decided that for themselves. Nobody may have said it, but they might just think, well, I just don't sound right. People have this idea that they have to sound right, that there is such a thing as right. This is the old idea, the one we were talking about before, with the stakeholders thinking that there is a gold standard, something that the academy says is the right way. Teachers who believe that there is a right and correct way and that they don't sound like it, they're going to feel like, well, if they join a course on pronunciation, it's just going to be an attack on their self-worth. They're just going to find themselves constantly being shown how they lack. If the course were to do that, a pronunciation course were to do that, I would think that would be a problem with the course, not with the teacher. I think a course should be much more up to date with their view of what is and what is not good pronunciation. It's not sounding like the Queen. And if you think it is, that could easily put you off doing the course. If you comparing yourself to something that is not appropriate. I mean, right, so that was the question about what teachers get put off by. I recently wrote an article on that topic, in fact, on a Cambridge blog. The other question was about drilling. Well, I did try to demonstrate a little bit of drilling with this rapier chant, with the things like the back chaining and that micro loop with cooked and 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 cooked. You can vary the speed. You can change your pitch of your voice. Cooked, 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 cooked. Change your voice. Do all kinds of play around with it. So if the question was, do you think drilling is good? Yes, I think drilling is good. Why has it got a bad press? Well, it sounds like something rather like soldiers marching around a square, a drill, a military drill. That sounds pretty boring, right? It sounds like discipline. And why? So drilling has a bad press, but I think it's actually potentially one of the most enjoyable things that you do in your lesson, and very useful. And it's energetic. It's got physicality about it. It's the very essence of pronunciation teaching.
Yeah, it's very important that you use the word physicality there, because it's really, I think, more than ever, we really have to incorporate this into not just it's what is on the book, it's what we can do, and we need our bodies to produce sounds, and just like we do in our first language. Right? And I think I can go to a final, I promise, the final question. As you have some phonetic symbols behind you, I think you're not skeptical of those. And Jen Taylor is asking, just mentioned how important it is that learners know why they're doing something, and a lot are, from experience, skeptical of a phonemic chart. So what are your tips in the early stages with the class on introducing the chart or activities using the chart?
The important thing is not to view the symbols as representing an exact specific sound. These symbols are actually repurposed phonetic symbols. A phonetic symbol represents a specific sound, but a phonemic symbol, which is what these are, is the same symbols, but they're being used as phonemic symbols. A phonemic symbol represents a range of sounds. So the example of the trying to point to it in my, there we go, the duck vowel, that was the bane of my existence when I was training to be a teacher, because I wasn't getting it right, and I found it really impossible to work out what the hell they wanted. This was an international house in London, and they were going, oh, you're not getting that right, that's not the right one. I think they were wrong. Not because I was pronouncing it right, no, because they were thinking that it was one specific sound. No, it's not a phonetic sound, it's a phonemic sound. It's a range of sounds. It's the same sound. It's the sound you have in duck, duck, dak. Whichever pronunciation you have, it's that. That's what it is. Right. So why bother if it's that flexible? Because it's a system of distinctions. The duck vowel can be defined as being not the sock vowel. So rather than define it by what it is, define it by what it isn't. That's why a chart is useful. It shows you all of the distinctions in the language. So yeah, if you start saying, well, this it's got to be exactly like this, exactly.
That's the only way, right?
Duck. It's just going nowhere. It's going nowhere. It's bound to be. Well, it's making work for nothing.
Couldn't agree more. So I think we have to call it a day. Unfortunately, most of us would be here for 2 more hours at least, but we've been asking you questions for the past 40 minutes non-stop.
So time for a cup of tea.
Yeah, exactly.
Time for a cup of tea.
Yes, let's stop on that. So we'd really like to thank you for your time and your contributions today. I really hope everyone's really thankful for your presentation, for your contributions with us, and for your being such a good sport and helping us with the questions and everything. And I'm just okay, lots of thank you messages coming, so I'm not going to post anything there. But really thank you for this opportunity, for your time, Mark. This has been really insightful for many of us, I'm very sure.
Thank you, and goodbye, everybody. Have a nice day. Thanks, Victor. Thank you for hosting.
Yeah.